The US is negotiating with Russia about Ukraine without having Ukrainians involved. JD Vance, the vice president, tells Germans to vote for a far-right party, and Donald Trump is cutting thousands of jobs, even in the DoD. A lot to talk about with Ben Hodges, a retired general whom I'm reaching now in Germany. Ben, good to see you.
I always like your program.
Thank you very much. Ben, how do you think history books will write about what we have seen in the last couple of days?
Well, I think people are going to try and understand why has the United States taken such after 80 years, seems like such a sudden change in our broad strategic approach to Europe. What was the real reason for that? It's not clear to me, certainly.
Do you have any explanation? I mean, we met at the security conference just a couple of days ago. After JD Vance spoke, you talked to many, of course, members of the security world from Germany, from the United States. Maybe we start with your American colleagues. How did they react, and what's their explanation?
I think of course, there is no simple answer to this. And I'm trying to understand so that I can explain what I think I heard. As you know, every administration comes in with different objectives, perhaps, or different approaches to the big issues. So this administration certainly is a significant departure from the previous administration, but it's still new. I mean, early days, I don't know that they have yet gotten themselves organized on who does what. The vice president, I don't think, is going to be a foreign policy guy. So it seemed, so the speech that he delivered was a shocking presentation, but I think it was intended to be that, to really, as the Lithuanian president called it, a taser to Europe. So I think that was intentional, but it certainly was a different type message than certainly what I was expecting standing there in the Bayerischerhof. We were all expecting to get pounded, to hear the vice president pound our European allies about defense spending. The administration, I guess, let me say it like this. I think the president has three broad priorities now regarding Europe. Number one, stop the fighting. And he's been consistent about this. You know, whatever one might think about the president, he has a long record of opposing endless wars and war in general. So I think he is sincere in this. His second priority, I think, is to make sure that once the war in Ukraine has been stopped, that things are in place so that there is no resumption. Again, I think in terms of broad goals, nobody would argue against that. The issue will be in the details. What does that mean? And then this third priority is what everybody refers to as burden sharing. You know, every president has argued for this, but this president, I think, is going to take steps to cause nations to do it in ways that have never been seen before.
I mean, these 3 points you're talking about, I think many people could agree on that, but the big question, of course, lies in the detail. And isn't it a really, how shall I say that? Yeah, well, I say it, a kind of a scary sign that Russia met with the US without Ukraine, without President Zelensky, to talk about Ukraine.
So this is another thing that I have been trying to figure out. And you know, the last 10 days have been a barrage of different messages and new messages, and it's not a traditional diplomatic approach. You know, Radek Sikorski, the Polish foreign minister, compared it to the military doctrine of reconnaissance by fire versus the traditional sort of diplomatic approach. I think the resolution of this war, of Russia's war against Ukraine, first of all, this is going to be a very long process. It was not going to be 24 hours. It's not going to be 100 days. I think we're talking about many months. And I think I see three sort of phases. Yeah. Phase one, we're in it now. This is the preparation phase. These are not negotiations. What happened in Riyadh, those are not negotiations about the end of the war. These are talks about how to get to negotiations. So the day that Secretary Rubio headed to Riyadh, the State Department made an announcement that these are not negotiations. These were a continuation of the phone call between Trump and Putin. So when you hear that, and then you look at General Kellogg going to Brussels and then to Kyiv, all the European leaders meeting, or many European leaders meeting in Paris, and all the other things that are happening, these are leaders trying to figure out what is the path to a ceasefire and then to negotiation. So this is not going to be clean. It's going to have a lot of rough edges on it over the next, I think, many weeks. Certainly the Russians, they've intensified their attacks. They don't show any interest in actually having real negotiations. They think they're winning right now. And so it's going to take a long time to get to the point where there's an agreed ceasefire and then negotiations. And I'll come back to the president in just a second. The second phase is the actual ceasefire, where, and of course, nobody believes that Russia would actually live up to any agreement on ceasefire unless there is a force that will compel them to live up to it. So a lot of what's happening now are discussions about what does this look like, how to do it. But once that ceasefire is in place and it looks like it might hold, then you can get to actual negotiations about the long-term outcomes of sovereignty, security, and probably some other things not directly related to Ukraine. So I could be totally wrong, but I see three phases like that. And again, I think we're talking many months before this is sort of concluded.
But until this ceasefire is taking place, you just said it might take many months. That could mean that Russia gains more and more territory.
It could, but actually they're not. I mean, Munic last year, Navalny was killed, and the Ukrainian city of Avdiivka was finally captured by the Russians. And I remember people were like, "Oh my God, Avdiivka!" When you look on the map, Avdiivka is almost in Russia. I mean, it's as far east as you can go in Ukraine. And now here we are, exactly 1 year later, and the Russians still have not been able to capture Pokrovsk, which is only 60 kilometers from Avdiivka, even though they've lost almost 200,000 troops since last year. So I don't see Russia having the capability in the next few months to knock Ukraine out of the war. Now, if after a few months, and I don't know how many months, there's not resupply of ammunition, for example, to Ukraine, at some point that could start to change. But right now, I don't have the feeling that the Russians actually can knock Ukraine out. In fact, the Russians have not been able to eliminate the Ukrainian bridgehead in Kursk since August, which is incredible.
Ben, why is Trump so fascinated about Putin, and what does he want from this relationship? I mean, traditionally Republicans are really critical with Russia, but that seems to really be changing, not only in the White House, but also in Congress. What's behind that?
I never in my life would have imagined that this would be the case. But this is not my parents' Republican Party either. I mean, the Republican Party has changed significantly. And in some ways, the Democrats have changed, where the Democrats are more anti-Russia than the Republicans, which is interesting. And I could not explain why that is. Now, your question about President Trump and President Putin is a very good one, and it's something I have been trying to understand. Um, it's probably a combination of things. I mean, part of it could be this is, President Trump sees himself as the grand deal maker, the negotiator, and so you start off with a maximalist position here,
Mm.
and and then you eventually come back to here. So maybe he's starting there. I don't know. Then the second possibility or thing to think about is I think the president, of course, he wants to be respected. And I think he could turn very quickly if when he realizes or begins to believe that the Russians are playing him, that they are never ever going to give him the deal that he thinks he wants, and he has pretty much staked his whole reputation on getting the peace. And so if the Russians overplay their hand, I can imagine the president turning on them very quickly. He has so much more leverage over the Russians now than he did 4 years ago or 8 years ago. Economically, the Russians are in trouble in Ukraine. I mean, there's a lot of things that he could do, either that would crush Russia's economy or by giving Ukraine everything they wanted. So that's why I think we're in this preparation phase where a lot of things are going to be moving around. Uh, but then, of course, the third possibility is that I am absolutely totally wrong, and he really does embrace Putin, and he really does dislike Zelensky, and everything we're hearing now is the real position. I hope that's not true, but it certainly could be.
Some people say we are like in the beginning of a new world order. There's Russia, there's China, there's the United States, and they kind of start to accept each others in their areas, in their territories, and also accepting that the bigger countries eat the smaller countries. What I'm saying is like it's okay for Russia to occupy or to take Ukraine, Taiwan can be taken by China, and Trump can take Greenland. Do you see that possibility?
Well, certainly, I have heard a lot of people speculate that was kind of what's happening, and it does have that feeling. Um, I hope that's not the case. I think, what the United States has done over the last 80 years, and from which we have benefited for 80 years, is this respect for sovereignty of nations and a network of allies that we could always count on, even if there was, friction between countries at times. Um, One of the big differences, of course, between the United States and China and Russia is that those are actual dictators. I mean, there's no such thing as a free and fair election in China or Russia. Nobody really believes that. Um, in the United States, of course, we have not perfect, but we do have elections. We have midterm elections coming up here in about 20 months. So I spoke with several members of Congress, Republican members of Congress at the Munic Security Conference. They are very aware of midterm elections, as you would expect, and the impact that will have, and that if things that the administration is doing now, that could have create problems for them in the midterms.
Mm.
So I think we should all remember that we are only into the fifth week now of this administration. It seems like 5 months, but it's really only the fifth week. Um, and that I'm trying hard to not get too emotional about it, but to stay calmer and count and trust in the resilience of America's constitutional design that this will eventually work out. At the end of the day, he was elected, and I can't love our democracy only if I like who got elected.
You have been based, you've been working in Germany, you're living in Germany now. We talk with each other. You are in Frankfurt at the moment. What can Germany, what can Europe do?
There's probably three things that Germany and other European allies should be doing. Number one, do what you said you would do, which is when it comes to fulfilling your obligations for security and contribution to collective security. You know, I hear it all the time. Yes, we need to do more. There's nobody arguing against it. The problem is they're not doing it. There's not yet the political will to actually do that, at least in some countries in Europe, including Germany. Whereas I was just in Lithuania, you know, they're not confused. They're almost at 5% GDP, and they plan to go higher next year. Poland, other East flank countries, they're there. So it is possible. That's the first thing. The second thing is I think that Germany and other countries should not complain about being left out of these talks, but instead get involved in these talks, working together and laying out to the administration and to Russia and to Ukraine, these are Europe's interests. We have interests also. And, you know, the EU still has sanctions on Russia. So you make it clear those sanctions will remain in place even if the negotiations call for ending sanctions. Europe is not bound to that, just like Ukraine is not bound to accept whatever comes out of the negotiation. That sounds a little bit more simplistic. It's obviously going to be much more challenging, but I'm just thinking Germany's a sovereign nation. And of course, you have an election coming up here in just a few days, so I understand it may be some time, but nonetheless, to me, this would be an important thing in a way for Germany to lead inside Europe. And then the third thing I would say is, you know, don't lose confidence in your American friends. We've been through a lot over the 250 years of our history, and we've been through some really bad times. And you know, right now is people are looking at us and wondering what's going on. I would just say, don't give up on us.
Ben Hodges, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ines. Schönes Wochenende.